Hi everybody, it's Babos. This is Friday. It's Friday. What the heck is it? It's the 20. It's the 17th. It's November 27th. Not November 17th. Oh my God. What day of the week is this? It's Friday. So we're here, and this is the true community gathering. It's a little false start for me here, but I'm regaining consciousness, and I'm with you now. Um, we've been doing this since April 17th, 2020. So this is, I believe, our 180th, or I think it's our 180th consecutive week of community gatherings talking about all aspects of theater. Originally, we did this as a community service because of something called shutdown, which everybody remembers, right? Right. We remember shutdown. Um, Nobody knew what to do with themselves. Everybody suggested I open up a Zoom room. I said, "What is that?" And then finally figured it out and opened up a Zoom room. And now people come here every Friday. And at first we talked about surviving COVID, and now we're talking about surviving post-COVID because we're more or less returned to what the world used to be. We're out of shutdown. COVID is no longer the dire threat that it used to be. And the other thing I do like to remind people of is that COVID is still here. We still have it. I had my fifth vaccination last week, and I had my fourth case of COVID at the very beginning of July. So be conscious, be careful, and be considerate of the people around you. We're still in a world that isn't quite what we would like it to be. And that's not just because of COVID, but that's another story. We'll talk about that some other time. The world is a mess. So we're talking about things now that are more related to the normal business of theater. And we have become more global because of COVID, because of Zoom. True, which was once a really New York-centric organization, has now opened up to people from around the world and around the country. And the London market is of great interest to so many people. We have checked in periodically over the past 3 years to see what's going on. And one of our touchstones for what's happening in theater has always been Neil Gooding, who is an Australian who produces in UK and US. So he has a triple perspective that we can call on. You've also met Katy Lipson once before, who's a really incredibly prodigious producer of new work in London, new work and just all sorts of theater in London, West End and off West End and everywhere. I've never seen anybody produce so much in my life. Katy, you're just a wonder. And Patrick Gracey is new to us, so I'm going to bring Patrick, Neil, and Katy into the room right now so we can say hi to them. And Patrick, since I don't know you, why don't we start with you?
So,
Tell us a
hello,
little
and
bit.
thank you for having me tonight.
You're welcome. Tell us a little bit about your background and why in the heaven's name are you involved in theater?
Oh, it's a terrible idea. Uh, I don't know why anyone does it. As you can obviously tell, like Neil, I'm originally from Australia and studied commerce and information systems in Melbourne before moving to London, where I originally worked on a little show called Wicked when it first opened in London back in 2006, um, as well as the West End and Broadway transfers of Frost Nixon from the Donmar. I then worked on the original production of Spamalot in the West End many years ago now, and it's lovely to see it coming back in a slightly different form to Broadway at the moment. I was general manager of the Donmar during part of Michael Granage's tenure, which was an extraordinary time to be there. We did
I just want to
18
jump. I just want to
shows.
jump in and say that Spamalot is the first show I've seen in a long time that has gotten almost unanimously positive reviews. I just looked at
It,
the
it
whole rundown of reviews. Amazing.
it was one of the most joyful shows to ever work on because our offices were above the theatre at the Palace Theatre. And so you'd wander down on a matinee day and watch a bit of Brightside, and it was just glorious.
And also,
Um, it
it also seems that at this point in theater and into the world, it's good to have a show that proclaims that it's not dead yet. So
yes,
so
yes,
we're still here.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, then I was general manager of the Donmar during part of Michael Granage's tenure. which was an amazing time to be there because we were, in addition to the 6 shows a year we were doing at the Donmar, we had a season in the West End at Wyndham's Theatre. We had Guys and Dolls in Australia, Mary Stewart on Broadway, Ross Nixon on tour in the US, a couple of other West End transfers and UK tours. And then from there, I went back to Australia to put up Mary Poppins for Cameron and Disney, which was a delight. And then from there, lived and worked in New York for a couple of years as the general manager for Stuart Thompson, including Death of a Salesman on Broadway that Mike Nichols directed with Phil Hoffman for Stuart and for Scott Rudin. And yes, all of those stories. And a couple of other plays for Stuart, and then but knew that I wanted to produce and wanted to live and work in London as my base. And so moved back to London in 2013, 10 years ago now, to produce for ATG before setting up shop myself. And in addition to being a producer and general manager, I also sit on the boards of the Society of London Theatre, which is our equivalent of the Broadway League, the League of Independent Producers here, and I chair the joint SOLT and UK Theatre Policy Research and Advocacy Committee, so lead a lot of the work of our engagement with government.
So what do you do to keep busy?
Yeah. This week especially has been a very heavy week of SOLT work with board meetings and doing fun. It was funnily enough funny that this was occurring this week because I had a 2-hour roundtable with the Department of Business and Trade to extol the virtues of UK theatre and support for import and export around the world.
Well, I'm going to ask Katy Lipson now to extol the virtues of British theatre and tell us a little bit about your background as well.
Thank you. So I run a company called Aria Entertainment. It's my own sort of independent company that I set up in 2012. It took me a while to kind of realize I wanted to produce theatre. I sort of tread the boards and worked as a vocal coach and an MD and had lots of different creative jobs. Until
wait. Did you say vocal coach and music director? I was thinking
yeah,
doctor.
Sorry. Yeah, I trained in classical music. So I had a classical music degree, didn't really know what producing was, and sort of entered this world of vocal coaching and acting through song coaching, but always through musical theatre. And I'd done quite a lot of shows at university where I had produced the shows. And then I sort of evolved into wanting to be a commercial producer, and in the UK, so I don't have necessarily the experience that Patrick has in terms of understanding Broadway and international productions in that way yet. But what I did was sort of started very, very small on my own, just me and a computer, doing shows in pub theatres of 50 seats or more. And over the last 10 years, have built into doing national touring on West End, and now building much bigger shows, hopefully to open in New York and the West End. But it's taken me, you know, quite a few years to build up my reputation, my investor pool, focusing on musicals and music-led plays, because they were my passion. They were the things that I sort of understood and cared about. And as we'll come on to, it's easier to start independently with smaller budgets in the UK, which is what a lot of this chat will be. So it enabled me to spring-step my career. So, you know, yes, I have done around 100 shows in the last 11 years, you know, but I'm doing 11 shows a year, which probably means I raise £1 million over 11 shows rather than £1 million for one show. So it's enabled me to utilize different partners for different shows, different investors, different models of funding from the Arts Council, of, you know, subsidizing some shows with the other, income from the other, and sort of running a business. But it took me probably half of this time to actually get to a point where I'm a salaried member of my own company. So
congratulations. That was a landmark for us too.
But it took five years to actually create a business that the shows were big enough to actually pay me fees. And that was my business model. Start small, learn my craft in my way, work with a vast array of creatives that are all at the start of their career. I'll just talk, and then, I mean, some of the shows that I've been involved with that are more notable are, we were the UK first ever producer of the Addams Family, which was my first commercial production in 2017. I say first commercial, it was the first show I raised significant capital for, having raised much less before that, and actually paid me a fee where I thought, wow, okay, can this career be sustainable through a show alone? So we've done the revival of Hair, which started at a small theatre I created called the Hope Mill in Manchester, where I established a theatre with two other producers, where we brought shows out of London that had never been seen. So remarkably, we did the Northern premiere of Parade, the Northern premiere of Spring Awakening, of Pippin, you know, kind of titles that we all know, but a lot of people wouldn't know, because they've never toured the national touring circuit, but are really beautiful musicals revered in our genre. So we have done the Toxic Avenger, as someone mentioned. That was the European premiere. It started off West End and moved to the Arts Theatre, where
someone mentioned it was the original producer of Toxic Avenger. It was Tom
Yes.
Pullum.
Yes, I didn't see who it was on the
that was Tom Pullum. For those of you who are out there watching us,
yes.
Tom is with us today as well.
And I used to identify a lot of titles that hadn't been seen before. That was sort of, how do I make an impact as a young producer that is not going to transfer the hit Broadway show of Hamilton to England, because we all know that the successful shows will come over with their original American teams and maybe someone in the UK to spearhead it. But I had to identify maybe some shows that hadn't transferred, or some shows that needed to be reimagined or done in a boutique style, like the Menier Chocolate Factory are known for. And then just finally, the pandemic was kind of a turning point for me, because I had a couple of successful shows that made my reputation grow, and kind of gave me more ambition to grow shows I'd started, both creatively and as in, like, I'd taken a revival, but kind of re-energized it, but also found something new. And those shows were The Last 5 Years, which we revived before the pandemic, but then it came back and moved to the Garrick, and now it's been licensed in China and Taiwan with a kind of new concept. And then we found a little show called Cruise, which was a one-man play, which was, you know, went well and sold well, got good reviews, and made a bit of noise in the industry, to mean that I built a much stronger relationship with West End theatre owners. And now there's a direct communication of, what shows are you developing over the next 2-3 years that we might like to come and see, which, you know, it's not always easy to engage people. People have to believe in your work. They have to attend. They have to emotionally invest. So to have a relationship now with theatre owners is good. And obviously we're looking at plans to bring these shows to the US and distribute them further, which wasn't sort of any, you know, I didn't have that knowledge before the last few years of how to distribute ideas. So my focus over the next 5 years is really not to do any more revivals. It's to focus completely on a new slate of shows that I either curate, commission, find and help and support writers, and everything we do will be original, and hopefully that will reap dividends in time.
Well, we haven't even introduced Neil yet, and yet between you and Patrick, I think I have 1,341 talking points. So I don't even know where I'm going to start. But I have to also just commend you, both of you. You make, when you talk about theater, it sounds ever so civilized. I think we're just suckers for British accents, but this is a business that doesn't always feel so civilized here. Neil, I'm going to bring you on now. So we all know you, but remind us of who you are, because we've seen you late. I think this is like your 5th time on the show.
Yeah,
I think.
So Neil Gooding, producer and director, obviously from Australia, originally, like Pat. I quite often feel that Katy and I lived parallel lives in some ways. Like we've talked about this before, because I accept that I'm obviously significantly older, which is a shame these days. But because and maybe this is a circumstance of growing up in England or growing up in Australia, which is that, like Katy said, if you're an Australian, if you want to be a producer in Australia, you have a few options. One is you license works, and I set up a theatre company called the Hayes Theatre, and you know, my first shows were like Assassins and shows that I loved, and at the Hayes we were able to do the Australian premiere of Dogfight and Bridges of Madison County. But I also, within Australia, ran a company called New Musicals Australia, where we were sort of the NAMPT of Australia in some ways. And so we had, you know, hundreds of musicals submitted, and I did a lot of development of new musicals with Australian writers, which is a very non-commercial pathway to take. And that sort of led me to moving to America, where the kind of shows that I loved, like small to medium shows, like the Come From Aways and the Dear Evan Hansons, were becoming Broadway hits at the time that my divorce happened. So I moved to America thinking, well, I'm moving to the mecca of musical theatre development, and this is what you do, and sort of fell in love in New York, and I'm here. But you know, anyone that heard me talk at NAMPT on those panels a few weeks ago are very clear that, you know, I've now very clearly hit the point of going, I just think the barriers and the cost of developing shows and staging shows in New York in particular are so prohibitive that all of my work is about to go back overseas, which is a shame because I'm living here. And certainly as I'm entering the phase of, you know, I've done the co-producer game here, and what producing is called in America, which is essentially, you know, ideally raise money for other people's shows. So I'm definitely going back to the mode, a bit like Katy, of what I did for many years, which is to work with writers, come up with new show ideas, develop shows from scratch. And that's where I guess the conversation, having heard all the people's intros at the start, and I feel like I am one of the people in New York that's been saying for a number of years now, why are you doing this show in New York? Take it to London. And I fear I'm going to have to dampen down everybody's expectations today, because because everybody on this panel clearly has a show and they all think they're perfect for London. But I do think that, you know, London is still you're still developing shows, and it's still risky, and it's still expensive, and it's still, but it's not as risky as New York.
Yeah, we can let's start with the differences between.
As I said, really, I think this panel should not be. It's not about any individual show. It should really be a discussion about. Let's just talk about particularly the phase of two things. One is, how do you take something from the page to a point that's ready to go to the stage in either New York or London, and how do you then get it onto a bigger stage in London and New York? They're two very different things, and.
There's a ton to talk about. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just also want to jump in and say that lately, you know, Neil knows we do something called the writer producer speed date. So I get like 11 producers every 3 months. I get them on a panel, and they talk to people, they listen to people pitch, and they give them their thoughts. I've been hearing a lot of people say lately that they don't see any point in doing stage readings, which is one of the things that's always been at the heart of our business. So I mean, I think that people are just looking for new ways of doing things.
Well, and that's why I said I want everyone here to go, well, London's the solution to all my problems, because London is still tricky. But the issue in New York is, I think it's still operating like there's like 29-hour reads are a good substitute for workshops, which they're not. And I think that there's a thing of going that people still think there's an off-Broadway, that you can go and put your show off Broadway and then you're going to get picked up and go to Broadway, which doesn't happen. And if you do go off Broadway, you're probably going to cost yourself 4 or 5 times the amount of money that would have cost to do it in London at somewhere like the Suffolk Playhouse. Or
well, that's
so there's all those discussions. Yeah,
that's a very concrete place to start. Is the fact that to develop shows in UK does cost significantly less than it costs here in New York. And can we talk a little bit about that and why that is?
Yeah, so I'm going to jump in here on 2 points. So one is on the the competition side, and then I'll get to the cost side. So fortunately, London theatre has recovered much better than New York, and due to a range of factors. So last year, the number of performances were up 4.7% on 2019. Our audiences were up 7.2% on 2019, and our revenue was up 11.75% on 2019. However,
I think none of those figures apply to New York at all. But I think New York is down on all counts.
Broadway was down 15% in terms of audiences and revenue. So which is great. but it is competitive. Basically, in order to book a theatre in the West End, you are looking at least a year out right now. Some theatres are booked out even further than that at the moment. And for musicals, especially of a certain size, it is impossible. They are waiting and waiting and have been waiting, as Neil knows, for 2 or more years at times, to wait for the right size musical house to become available.
But that doesn't sound
Going to
significantly
the cost.
that doesn't sound significantly different from New York. New York is also
No,
equally difficult to get.
Well, New York
venues.
is going through the
But the
phase.
theatre-
New York is going through the phase right now where there's I would say there's 10 musicals that didn't think they were getting a theater this year that are getting theaters all of a sudden.
Oh well, that's
But part of the
interesting.
thing is London theatres are booked 52 weeks a year. They don't have dark periods like Broadway has. Even when a show, Ain't Too Proud closed early, and that allowed the National Theatre to transfer Dear England into that same theatre immediately and without missing a beat. On the cost side of things, so a play in the West End will capitalise at anywhere between £500,000 to £2 million on the upper end of things. Whereas on Broadway, the average capitalisation of a play on Broadway last year was $6 million. So, and those costs are much of which is inherently related to Broadway, whether it be rents and the cost of operating a theatre, whether it be the marketing environment and, competing in the New York media market, as well as, personnel and union costs. So a play that capitalised at £600,000 here, capitalised Broadway on Broadway at $4 million. A play that capitalised at £1.1 million here, capitalised on Broadway at $8 million. So it's a huge difference in terms of what it costs, and that's at every level. So if I want to commission a play here, I'm paying a playwright anywhere between 10 to 15 grand all in to get me through to opening night.
Katy,
for a West End play.
I know you're in the US right now. You're on the West Coast. So are you here working on a project that's going to happen here, or something that you're bringing to London?
Nothing specifically, like both holiday and work, like, the usual networking, seeing venues. Because really up till now, I only really went to New York, and I really only went to see Broadway and off Broadway. But now I've seen theatres in other areas and learned more about what theatres kind of originate work and how you can bring over. I was involved with Brokeback Mountain with Nika Burns in the West End this year, and we're looking at opportunities for that to begin in the US, whether it would be a complete replica or so just kind of exploring this landscape for the right project. I'll never stop originating things in London, but certain projects you need to figure out where else they're going to go.
So what is the use of the US market?
It really to me seems to now in my game plan of where I can choose to develop things in Australia, which is a bit too far away for a lot of things, or London or other markets, is I'm very much coming to the opinion that the use of the US market is to exploit something that's already becoming a hit. So that you may as well do all of your development not in the USA. You may as well do your first production not in the USA, because like Katy's just done Fly After Mrs. Harris, and I won't say that. I'll let Katy mention the capitalization she wants, but the capitalization for that would have been, if the equivalent of that production would have been doing it at New World Stages or the West Side Theatre or bigger, and it would have been a couple of million US dollars, and that certainly is not what it costs to work out in London if your show has an international life and audiences that want to see it. So I'm very much of the opinion now that the USA has great writers, but so does the UK. And that, you find your project and you find your writers, you develop them in the cheaper environment. And London is the perfect storm where you go, it's cheaper to do it, not cheap, but cheaper. And you have excellent directors, you have amazing lighting designers and costume designers and set designers. You do your production there, and if that production, like Six or like Come From Away coming out of Canada, if that production has a market and an audience, then you start going, is it viable to take it into the USA, which is clearly a huge market with ticket buyers and well-established theatre routes, but you want to figure out whether you have a show for a fraction of the cost before you come onto Broadway and spend $25 million.
And it feels like what the UK is starting to see, and it's really developing in the last 2 years, probably on the back of the success of Six, because it was this kind of undiscovered, underground kind of student production that was built up and up and up, is that we have to do these proof of concept productions. Yes, we have to know it's the best artistic product it can be, but we have to prove that there's an audience there and start with this mini version that then grows and grows and grows. And we're seeing that a lot now, where producers are doing concert versions of their shows in the West End for 2 nights, or a concert every Monday to build up momentum on a dark day in the theatre, which is probably unheard of in New York City, where we just go in a theatre, pay them £10,000, sit on the top of another set, use the PA, use the lighting rig, and do a concert. Those producers are still investing £250,000, £300,000 into that period, but they see that as a much more investable model than either doing an independent run, enhancing it regionally, or doing a closed shop. Because what we need is our audiences to dictate what's going to happen with our shows. And when I was a younger producer and I was going to New York and I was looking at Goodspeed and The Journey of Come From Away and other shows, I realized that they were doing that too. They were doing their developmental production. They were then doing their bigger version at La Jolla Playhouse, where they were giving the theatre millions of dollars, maybe another venue, and to propel that to Broadway. But they were doing it with millions of dollars to prove that show should have a destination of Broadway. So I think it's I always say, like, we're running a business, but we're really trying to find one show that becomes our business, a show that has longevity, that has the ability to translate and be international and multi-generational and timeless. We want longevity with our product, but we have to create that first. So to Neil's point about Flowers, Mrs. Harris, even the budget I did that for was a fraction of what it would have costed a regional theatre in England too, because doing it independently means you do have to be really tough. You do have to come up with a model that you stick to, whatever you do, because there's no way you can do it in any other way. And that would mean that, yes, I probably am paid less than I would be if I was on a salary at a theatre as a producer, which is why I have to do 5 or 6 of them. I used to have to do that many just to be able to survive. But that was the model then. This was a show I did because pure passion and feeling that this great British musical had to be seen, and it was unfair that it sat in a drawer. So someone had to be crazy and do it.
And I would say to add to that, Bob, one solution that when people debate me on my views about New York at the moment, one view that people say is, well, why don't you go to the regionals and do enhancements? But the level of enhancements, particularly for musicals around the USA, has reached a level where you can stage the show in the West End if you could get a theatre, and if the show is good. So even the enhancement model here is broken now, because there was no enhancements really under $1 million for a decent sized musical in the regional. And I've heard of one show that was going to enhance $4 or $5 million to a non-profit to do it. And so even that model here is different. And in the UK,
I just want to say I have heard of enhancements that haven't been that much money. Basically, the way we are supposed to understand enhancement is that the regional theater has a budget for their season, and they have like one open spot in their budget where you can come in, and the show that you want to bring in is going to cost so much more money than they would have spent, and so you enhance it for the difference. And unless it's changed now.
That difference has skyrocketed in the last few years. It's now that used to be the model, and there's a couple of smaller places that still do that, but the major institutions that are where the bigger musicals get developed,
La Jolla, Fifth Avenue.
Yeah, that's gone. They've and the end result of that is you're seeing like, you know, if you go to London at the moment in the last year or two, by the time you see Flouse and Mrs. Harris, and I've seen Operation Mincemeat go from the Suffolk Playhouse to the West End, and Ride is coming over to the Old Globe out of there, and I've seen a beautiful production of The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, and I've seen there is just show after show after show in this production line of these new original musicals that I look around and I go, where is that happening in America? And even if I had seen Six, like if I had seen Six at the New York Fringe Festival, the cost that Andy and his team were able to take Six from Edinburgh to the West End via the Arts Theatre is just not even, it's the cost of a workshop in some cases of doing it here. And the end result is you're seeing all these English shows come or go on stage, and like there's now sort of producers fighting over Operation Mincemeat. You're watching My Sons Are Queer come onto Broadway at far escalated budgets than what it actually cost to develop it and put it on the West End. But if your eyes are open, the end results of this process are already visible, which is that the UK machine is turning out great shows that are sort of the ones that are coming into America at vastly cheaper amounts than they could have been developed here.
And I think part of
Tom Pullum has.
I'm just going to jump in on the. I'm just going to jump in on the development side of things, because I think the other element of cost is what it buys you is time. So Operation Mincemeat started at New Diorama, had a successful run there, then had 2 successful runs at Southwark Playhouse, then had a successful run at Riverside Studios, all before it made it into the West End. And the capitalization of each of those runs was very low. And it was only actually when they moved to the West End that they really did a glow up in terms of the set. Six started off as a student production at Edinburgh before doing these one nights at the Arts Theatre, then going back to Edinburgh, Norwich, into the Arts Theatre. And the capitalisation of that was under £1 million, you know, for a very successful run in the West End. Or, you know, I know another musical last year that went up to Edinburgh, had a capitalisation of £100,000, returned to Edinburgh this year for a little bit more before going to a couple of regional theatres, and they're now, you know, charting their next step. But what that means is for a couple of £100,000, they've been able to put it in front of audiences multiple times, get that feedback, earn that word of mouth, and create a following and buzz, which means West End theatre owners are interested in it. And so for a lot of the shows that Neil and Katy have been talking about, and, you know, these shows that are doing concert productions in the West End, part of what they've been doing is releasing songs online, on Spotify, on TikTok, and other means, building a fan base online so that when they do a couple of performances in the West End, there is a fan base there who are already willing to support it. And doing those 3 nights in the West End then builds them a new fan base as well. And that is what, because having sat in those programming meetings, you know, at ATG, you are competing against.
I just want to jump in and say we had Joe Iaconis as a guest last year, and he also built a tremendous social media following, and it didn't translate into success here for his show.
Yep.
There are no easy answers to any of this. I just wanted to
also there is no guarantee. There is no guarantee. You're right.
Yeah, I wanted to point out that Tom Pullum has been saying a lot in the chat. And Tom, why don't you turn on your audio and mention some of the points that you're mentioning? You had at one point I've said that I think you were telling me that the enhancement deals they don't really work that way anymore for major regionals, which is what the other panelists were saying as well.
Yeah, exactly what Neil was saying is that, you know, yes, there are still wonderful theaters out there that will do that model of how much more is it going to cost us to do a particular show. Unfortunately, the houses that are now renowned for bringing shows to Broadway or doing the tryouts of shows coming to Broadway have really realized that it's a game, and they can get, you know, multi-million-dollar enhancements to be able to develop that particular show. So, you know, the commercialization of Broadway is such where it's so expensive that, in order to develop a show here in the United States, often you want to go through one of these regional houses of renown, and it's going to cost you 7 figures or more to be able to make that particular thing happen. So the fascinating thing about the London model, the West End of England, West End, London, all that, is that it seems that people are still very concerned and very concentrated on wanting theater to be successful and willing to develop things at reasonable costs and develop them in such a way that you're actually working on creating a great piece. I think the commercialization of what has happened in New York and Broadway is that the globalization of the world has created this environment where Broadway might be a focus, but the logical way to develop something seems not necessarily to be the United States anymore, because it's just so ridiculously expensive to do it, and the risk is so high.
Tom, you refer to something called, you call it the world developmental market. So I think that I just want to just touch on that for a second, because we're talking about London, but you're talking about the world development market. So you're talking about developing things outside of the US, which encompasses much more than UK, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I really think that, when the pandemic happened and the world suddenly discovered what Zoom was, anachronism for all the other things that exist, and the way theater was able to be seen over online, people realized that, it's not just New York anymore. New York is not the center of the universe. It might be one of the pinnacles of the universe in terms of getting shows into that lucrative after licensing market, but developing things anywhere that has the ability to actually develop and work on a show is exciting when you don't have all of these incredible costs that are associated with in the United States market, and specifically New York. So a world globalization of theater is benefited by things that we have over the internet and over this ability to stream things and the ability to develop things in a market that is less expensive than the overly expensive United States market is.
So we're all in agreement that New York is producing in New York has become ridiculously expensive and not practical anymore. And we all have agreed that you can develop things a lot less expensively by using UK as one of your developmental steps. And there are other places as well. We also seem to be in agreement about the fact that enhancement is no longer what it used to be, and that we now are expected to bring far too much money to an enhancement deal than is conscionable.
Well, and I think it goes to what Pat was saying before. It's the pressure of, like, if your tier 1 or tier 2 workshop is going to cost a couple of $100,000 US, or your enhancement is going to be over $1 million, the pressure on that, on the creatives, on the producers, on the investors, on everybody that weighs into that, you stop a good creative process. Like like Pat was saying with Six and with Operation Mincemeat and all these shows, they get to just play around in smaller theaters cheaply and work out what's working, what doesn't work. And somehow that also accelerates the pathway. Like the Operation Mincemeat, even though it did these things, they all happened relatively quickly in US terms. Like, so it went, and same with Little Big Things that's on at the moment. It went from not existing to on the West End in a time frame that we can only dream about in the USA, because we seem to be so delayed in waiting for money, and then we need this opportunity to pop up, which will be next year. And the other thing we're underestimating is the venues that are available in the UK. Like whether it's the Park Theatre, Southwark Playhouse, Charing Cross, or even smaller, there is a functioning set and region. Like Katy used to be at not Paper Mill, at Hope Mill, thank you, in Manchester. There is a set of theatres that are affordable if you can get your hands on them and if they like the work, and you can go in and do it cheaply, which don't exist in New York anymore.
So this raises another point, which is basically, I have a room full of people who have properties that they think could be developed in London. Do they attach themselves to an American producer, or do they how do they find their way to London producers who have the connections and can actually get their pieces done there? Or are there American producers who are just, as a matter of course, now producing in London and developing?
There's a lot of American money going to London, and has been for a few years, and there's a lot of producers. But if you're I think your question is, if you're an English producer, the aim is no one's sitting there going, this has to go to Broadway. Like that's the irony. Like everybody wants to play this game. The aim in London is to go, let's get the best show we can get, and then let's get that on in front of an audience. And then if that becomes Six, And if that becomes Operation Mincemeat and that becomes like Brokeback Mountain that Katy did, then there's an afterthought that goes, well, I guess we could go to America now, and who are the American producers that we know? But there's a heck of a lot of interaction between the English and American producers, and increasingly between English producers and American investors that are becoming very, very jaded about the economics and the losses on Broadway, and they're suddenly going, you know, because one thing Patrick and I talk about a lot is the idea that there's such an obsession on Broadway about whether something recoups or not, and recoupment is so hard that even the successful plays, if you put aside Plaza Suite in the last 2 years, the successful plays that recouped, they made about 48 cents for investors on top of their capitalization. In the UK, plays can run for way shorter, charge cheaper ticket prices, and make much, much better returns than that. And sometimes it's the same play, something like a Prima Facie or you know, like the same play can make better money in London in a shorter run, charging cheaper ticket prices.
Let's talk about aesthetic for a second, because I mean, this is certainly a very rich conversation as it is, but people are saying that they have shows that they think would work well in London. What does that mean to you? What is a UK property versus a US property?
Well, it just to me means, I mean, my first question is, are you talking about, I want to go straight to the West End with my show because I think I've got the best show ever written and London's just going to lay down and put my show on? Or are you talking about, I've got a script and I want to develop? Because if you've got a script and you're developing it, that's the phase that I go, absolutely take it to London. But you need to know the London market. You have to, you know, there's not producers there that are necessarily just going to go, great, out of the 100 scripts I've seen this year, I'm going to do that one. Like, you need to know directors, you need to know producers and general managers and things there. But Pat and Katy do this every day, so they're probably better to position.
And also, what I would say is, even as a producer developing work in London and, you know, ultimately with the West End in mind, with a play, you are more likely than not going to take it to a subsidized theatre in London or a regional theatre first. And that's got nothing to do with, you know, who you are as a producer, as it were. So Peter Morgan in 2016 started writing the play Patriot, developed it over a number of years with Sonia Friedman. Sonia Friedman took it, you know, it's Peter Morgan. He wrote The Crown. He wrote Frost Nixon. He wrote The Audience. He wrote The Queen. He is a playwright whose name sells tickets. Nonetheless, she wanted to take it to a subsidized theatre first. She took it to one London subsidized theatre, and they went, not really for us. And then she took it to the Almeida, who went, yeah, actually, we really like this. This is for us. And it was staged there, did very well, and then transferred successfully into the West End.
You touched on something that I think is worth mentioning. When we talk about the difference between the U.S. market, or at least the New York market and the London market, one of the things that I think has been demonstrated, although it seems to be shifting a little bit now, is London has always been much more open to non-musicals than the Broadway audience. Broadway audience has always supported musicals. It's been a lot harder to make a go of it with a play. And you know, I think that's worth noting in terms of talking about the differences between UK and the US market. There was also something else you said.
And Bob, something interesting on that is I am getting more and more to a point where I go, because, you know, when you're Australian and then you move to the USA, I think there are some cultural differences, and there are some cultural differences between the UK and the USA. And one of the ways that shows up in the last few years has been like the success of Pretty Woman in the UK in the West End, which wasn't financially successful on Broadway, and Mrs. Doubtfire at the moment. And so I think some people look at that and go, well, this is because the English like these sort of genre musicals more than Broadway. And I think reviewers and stuff on Broadway are brutal on those, clearly. But I actually just go, I think what it is the economics of making Pretty Woman work on Broadway and making Tootsie work on Broadway are so crippling that those shows can go on a US tour and do well, and they can go to the West End and do well, in the same way that I look at Shucked at the moment and I go, I think Shucked is a bit of a hit that's going to close with losses, clear big losses on Broadway. But when it goes to London and Australia, I'm interested because I go, I think it can turn good profits in those countries, possibly. Like, who knows? It's theatre. But I go, that's not to do with the show. That's to do with the economics of producing that show on Broadway for the first time.
I want to go back to something else Patrick said. You said that Patrick Gordon, the playwright. What's the name of the playwright that you mentioned?
Peter Morgan.
Peter Morgan. Yeah. You said that he was a name that you could a playwright's name. There is no playwright in the United States that will sell a ticket. They're really, I mean, even if you get to the people that won Pulitzer Prizes, our country doesn't have the appreciation. In my opinion, our country doesn't have the appreciation of the art of the play as London does. It has something to do with our entire educational system, and it also has something to do with our entire political system. You also mentioned one other thing that's a difference: subsidized theater. You said a magic word. You said subsidized theater. What kind of subsidized theater do we have here in New York? We have nothing. We have virtually nothing. The arts are not supported by our government. At least not to the extent that they are in London.
You've got the public, the Lincoln Center, Playwrights Horizon, Signature. There are big subsidized companies in New York that do plays.
They're not politically subsidized. They're subsidized by like foundations.
They're both.
But also that subsidy is absolutely vital. It has declined over time, and so something like the National Theatre, they of their annual turnover, only 20% of that is subsidy from government. The Donmar lost its subsidy earlier this year, but at the time it lost its subsidy, it only represented 7% of their annual turnover. And so, yes, subsidy exists and it is to varying degrees and it is vital and we will fight tooth and nail to keep it. But these theatres, like those in New York, are also reliant on ticket sales, sponsorship. We don't have subscribers, but we have members here for a lot of these theatres, and their commercial activity. And so, those transfers to the West End from those subsidised theatres is absolutely vital.
Because there's a lot of the public with Hamilton and with Chorus Line. You've got the RSC with Les Mis and Matilda. You've got the National with
not anymore with Les Mis, but yes.
No. But in their history, National with Warhorse and Curious Incident, The Dog in the Night Time, and so that becomes part of how they spend their money, is they develop these ambitious works. And if one out of, I don't know what the odds are of those shows becomes an ambitious work, that funds them pretty healthily for the next decade, they hope.
So I can see in the chat as well the talk about tax credits. So this is very much my area. So prior to COVID, we had theatre tax relief, which originally came into force in September of 2014 for theatre in the UK. And what is great about it is agnostic. So whether you are a subsidised theatre or a commercial theatre, if you are a fringe theatre, if you're a drama school, as long as you sell 5% of your tickets to the general public, that production is eligible for theatre tax relief. That theatre tax relief pre-pandemic was a rate of 20% of 18% of eligible costs for non-touring productions and 25% of 80% of eligible costs for touring productions. Post-pandemic, and I will claim this because it was me, we got an increase in the theatre tax relief from 20 and 25% to 45% and 50% of those rates, which we have gotten extended. It was originally a 3-year deal. We've got that extended for another 2 years. It is currently due to taper through 2025, and we are lobbying to get that made permanent. And what is great about that is, unlike the New York State theatre tax credit, it is relative to your budget because it represents a percentage. And so, it is more valuable to a large musical than it is to a small play. But regardless, it has been vital, and it is one of the reasons why London theatre has, and UK theatre generally has rebounded so strongly post-pandemic, because for investors and from an opportunity cost perspective, it helps mitigate the risk.
I want to get Katy into this conversation because I know she has to leave at 5:30. I mean at 6:30. So I guess the overarching theme right now is basically the difference between the American theater scene and the UK theater scene. I still maintain. Somebody says that John Patrick Shanley sells tickets. I don't think so. I don't think in America any writer will sell. I mean, of course they sell tickets. There are people that are fans of theirs, but I don't think it's like a vast number of ticket buyers that will keep a show running for a year, which they can do more likely to do in London than they are here. So, and Katy, I know that you're not involved in as much in the non-musical aspect of it anyway, but just from your own experiences, can you give us some of your takes on what the differences are between the UK market and the US market?
Well, in addition to what we've already discussed,
And there's been a ton.
Yes, I think Patrick mentioned something earlier, which I think we haven't delved into as much as we could, and it also ties into the subsidized venues, is the fact that our West End theatres are never empty. So there is a plethora and regular input of transfers from strong subsidized houses with plays into the West End. So they start where they start and they come in, and it's a regular occurrence. It's quite a something that you're used to, something that's just part of the ecology in the West End, that there'll always be an Almeida transfer. There'll probably be a Royal Court, an RSC. You'll see multiple plays.
Could this be due to the philosophies of the theater owners in London versus the theater owners in New York? I can't see them doing that here.
I think we have, as you said, very high quality work being developed in these venues, and there's a very strong collaboration between the commercial producer, or sometimes it's the organization itself having a commercial arm, working together to go, okay, it's been built there, now I'm gonna move it, and we're both gonna do well out of it, and it's quality work, and some of it might come to Broadway. And I think that, and I think because our theatres are constantly full, you'll speak to a theatre and they'll say, well, I know that I've got 16 weeks at the Garrick reserved for this person, or I know that, and I know that. So our theatres are always full. We have our crown jewel musicals that have been there for a long time, that Lion Kings, Les Mis, Wickeds, and Mamma Mia's, and whatever I forgot, Les Mis, and then more like Six, and now the play that goes wrong as well. And we only have a few houses available, and they're not that big all the time, because the bigger houses are taken up with Hamilton and Wicked, the huge, and Harry Potter. So we've got these smaller theatres that need smaller shows. And I just want to highlight, the new theatre where Little Big Things is, which Neil mentioned, and obviously where Brokeback Mountain was. So Nika Burns has built this theatre, an amazing in the round space of 500 odd seats that she's probably been trying to build for 5-6 years, and so far has programmed it quite uniquely, in the sense that she's programmed slots, so shows are being announced maybe in twos, so it's ending and something else is already on sale, and then she's announcing the next show. Maybe something successful will come where it just keeps running, like Little Big Things is extended, which is due to many reasons, I'm sure, the producer's experience and ability to do that as well. But I think that's an exciting model as well, where you can potentially put a show there that maybe feels like you're not actually in the West End. Maybe it feels more like it's a sort of subsidized venue, or an out-of-town venue, or a repertory house, where your work is being built for a limited period and could potentially move into another theatre. And another example is this funny kind of ghost thriller show called 222 Ghost Story, which was a surprise hit from the pandemic. The producer brought that show in, and another show, thinking that the other show would be his hit, and that didn't work. And this ghost story show, which he kept casting celebrities in, but kind of like the Daily Mail celebrities, like really kind of non-traditional stars, that were in television and music, and that show has moved from theatre to theatre. It just packs up and comes back in when there's a slot. And
well, ironically, none of the theatre owners would give it an open-ended run. So it played, I'm going to see if I can remember this, Wyndham's, then the Gielgud, then the Criterion, then the Lyric, and then it moved literally next door into the Apollo.
wow,
Because so it ran for a year in the West End, but at a whole lot of different theatres. Because no theatre owner was like, believed in it enough to give it an open-ended run.
and he still wants another theatre, Patrick. He says it was still doing
yeah.
well, and he's waiting for another theatre.
What are the costs of moving a show from
a
one
lot
theater
less
to
than
another?
they are. A lot less. Yeah. And
I mean,
and
here
it
it would
is
be
that
crazy.
Yeah. And it is that thing of going to Katy's point about theatres not being dark. It is literally a show will close on a Saturday night, and the trucks will be waiting outside the theatre to empty it out. And the new show will start moving in by the end of the following day. And if it's a play, you'll be starting previews the following Friday. That is how quick it is as well. So there's a cost element to that in terms of how quickly you tech a show, as to why it costs so little.
Are the union structures a little different there?
They're very different.
Massively.
Very different.
But a lot of
those,
a lot of those plays, aren't they, Patrick? They have come from somewhere else. So they've tried and tested. They've got their reviews. The ratio of how many are completely new, like I guess the one Sonia's just opened with the 2 stars in it. A lot of the plays are coming from somewhere often, or they're a revival with a star. So we know the plays already. We've seen Noises Off. We know, or whatever.
And that's where in the UK, like if you look at so Back to the Future was a big one, but that went through for us like Manchester Opera, but like Birmingham Rep is a great partner to a lot of these, like for What's New Pussycat, we did that there. But there's a lot of these sort of regional theatres there that yes, it sort of operates like an enhancement model, but the old enhancement model here, where that you are sort of just dumping up a not insignificant amount of money, but not a crippling amount of money to do it with these very well-funded regional theatres who do very like almost West End productions, or the difference is you can plan how you expand that production into the West End if you're going in, and it means that you can sort of drop into the West End if your show is a big enough hit. You can sort of just go. We go from here.
Just to that point, so just quickly comparing, say, What's New Pussycat, which got great reviews, ran regionally, and I believe is still waiting for a theatre because
we're still waiting, Katy.
it needs a certain size, and it probably wants a certain length. Therefore, it needs to wait until the perfect slot comes, because you get that one shot right with something that's that big. And then you've got the scale I'm very experienced in, which is an 8-week run in an independent venue that I hire, like a New World Stages, but in London. And I see what momentum might build. And I mean, to be honest, didn't start my career thinking my shows would transfer from Southwark Playhouse. I was doing revivals to earn my stripes. So, and these kind of stripped back shows without stars. So that was never my intention. But I truly believe that every single producer now with deeper pockets and ideas are now looking at these venues. We've seen ATG pick up a small, lovely musical called The Curious Case of Benjamin Button that ran with 5 people at the Southwark Playhouse before the pandemic, took it on with a couple of other commercial partners, workshopped it for 2 years, made it a bigger show so it feels more like like a community, a chorus of people, and put it into the Southwark Playhouse, which is this venue which you guys will know has housed a lot of shows that didn't make it from Broadway but were very good, like Grey Gardens and Sideshow and Working and The Life, and lots of cool titles that people wouldn't necessarily go straight to town with.
So all of those
in the Heights also had its premiere in this small little venue that's no bigger than 200 seats. A lot of young producers earn their stripes there. In fact, the Titanic show, Daniel Torrento's, that's done been done successfully many times, built from Southwark Playhouse to a national tour, to go into Canada, to being filmed. So my point there is, whilst I haven't done it yet because I haven't focused on new writing yet at this venue, bigger producers are thinking, you know what, we can capitalize our show for 300,000, 350. We do 8 weeks at Southwark, who incidentally have built a new space with slightly more tickets, slightly more seats, increasing the ticket prices a little bit and allowing a slightly longer run, which makes the recoupment of your capitalization slightly easier. And even if you go, you know what, I might come out of this recouping 75%, but you know what, I've got great reviews for the Nationals. We've built the show, we've tested the concept. Now we know it's worth moving it or not, you know, but you know, you haven't had to enhance with $1 million to find that out. You've
And that is when you want to talk about the differences, Bob. Like, so the tier 1, tier 2 workshop that in development phases in the US now are costing not much more in some cases than what it costs to do a production at the Southwark Playhouse or Katy's production at Riverside Studios. The difference is, of course, you can sell thousands of tickets to those productions and recoup a lot of that money. And
just so everybody knows, what Neil is referring to is a relatively new, like 3 or 4 years old series of workshop. What Equity now calls workshops, and it's tiered. There's 4 tiers in the workshops, and this is when everybody says workshop, we used to think, oh, that's, you know, an inexpensive way of developing the show, but no, workshop costs from first tier is maybe 150,000, and it can go up to like $1 million for tier 4, I guess. I don't know. And each tier allows you to do a little bit more, and the rules are involved. See, this is one of the things.
I've got some current costs. So here you go. For a 2-week tier 2 workshop of a musical in New York, cost $300,000. This is current costs.
Yeah.
Plus a 1-week music session cost another 35 grand.
What is British equity like? I mean, we deal with equity here, and the reason everything costs what it costs is because equity basically sets it up so that it has to cost what it costs. Is it? We
have a lot more flexibility with development. So okay. I will run a workshop and I don't speak to equity. I will run a 2-week workshop for a show and I don't speak to equity because I'm not hiring people on equity contracts for that. And I don't need to hire people on equity contracts for them. I'm paying them good money, but I'm not having to deal with equity. I don't have to guarantee them first future rights for any future life of the show. And, you know, as long as I'm working within other existing, you know, work rules, it's fine.
And just to be clear with some of those differences, when we talk about the differences, so that cost that Patrick just quoted, that is pretty much the equivalent of doing a similar production, like a production that Katy staged in London. The difference there is you get to rehearse a cast for 4 weeks or whatever the rehearsal is. You get to run for 6 or 8 weeks. You get audience to see it and you get income. But it's even further than that, because the problem in the US rules at the moment, they're just not conducive to developing shows, because there are restrictions on whether you could possibly do another development process within a certain amount of time. There are restrictions on if you replace cast members that were in that workshop, that they get paid out if there's a production and they're not part of it. There's restrictions on even simple things like, are you allowed to film that workshop and distribute it? Are you allowed to invite
not here.
Are you allowed to invite investors to that tier 1, tier 2 thing? Whereas in the UK, you go, the whole process is you put people in a room that may be interested in it, whether they be investors, they might be theaters, they might be creatives, and just everything is more flexible. And in my opinion, it all leads to better development and better work being created.
Well, there's a ton of stuff in the chat right now. Katy, can you stay a little longer or no?
I can answer one more thing and then I have to go.
Oh, well, I don't know which one we'll take. Could everybody do me a favor? There is a ton of stuff in the chat. I can't keep up with it all. Can you put a virtual hand raise up if there's something that's in the chat that you want us to address? And Katy will answer the first question that somebody asks. But you have to put
did want to say a point actually about, whilst it's really a lot more affordable to do an independent run and see your show on stage, and we've got a very vibrant off West End scene here with very high quality shows. We have shows in pub theatres that get used to get national reviewers to come and see it. building those shows a momentum to move is hard. And you're like, well, why? I got good reviews, I got good audiences. It's very hard to go, well, what's the next step, and to figure out what you can do with that after that, because you can't necessarily tour it, you can't necessarily grow it. It's very, very difficult if it hasn't come from one of the highly respected institutions or venues, or has a very credible director or leading actor in it. It's very, very difficult to propel something into a bigger marketplace. So we'll say, great to get your work on stage, but it feels like a stepping stone. And that's what I use the Off West End for, to learn and to play around with less money before I start to play with bigger numbers.
And that's I think I was trying to say at the start, Bob. I don't want to give the false impression to everybody. Like, I think the feeling at the moment is London is this promised land where everything happens easily. And Katy and Patrick will tell you that is not the case. It's a slog, and there's more opportunities and they're cheaper, but it's not, you don't just get to go to London and go, great, I've got a theatre and now I'm going to the West End. It is hard, and there's limited opportunities, and it's a risk. And when you get to the West End, you can lose all your money like anywhere else.
Yeah, and because we are full all the time, I think it's harder to even get a West End theatre, because we're modelled so differently. Most of the time our shows do survive their seasons. You know, they survive, you know, aspects of Love and what was the show, Ain't Too Proud, you know, they were surprised, you know, they were surprising close early. Most things, they survive their length. So finding a theatre to do something is hard. Nika Burns should be applauded, because she tends to come to people that can be malleable with their models and say, look, I've got a month available, let's do something, we'll do a box office split, we'll invest with you. And that's quite a unique thing as well for theatre owners to do. And it's allowed younger producers to play with bigger markets and learn a bit more. But it's harder to get a theatre, it's harder to propel upwards, because there's such a respect of certain, you know, it's a closed shop, it feels sometimes, to get a foot in, whereas things can just close so quickly on Broadway because of the financial situation of how expensive they are, and something else swoops in because it's ready and they can get the money together. So that's really interesting.
I
think that's an important point, because it's about relativity, because it's like, sorry, we're not saying that London is amazing and brilliant, and it's more, this is a question of going, is it way better than New York? In my opinion, yes, but that's because New York has become so unworkably difficult, not that London is so blissfully fantastic, you know.
So I just want to say that one person raised their hand. It was Paul Smith. So can Paul just ask? I don't know what his question is, but let's just let him ask a question.
In the case of my show, a drama that's now booked for a Broadway opening in July 2026, what benefit would there be to having a production in London first, say in 2025?
You could do the show for a quarter of the cost and have your sets and costumes ready to bring straight. I mean, having sat through Harmony being built over the last few weeks, it's been a real eye-opener to me, because the previous tech I saw was Back to the Future. So Back to the Future was kind of finished, and is a big show technically, but it was kind of finished in London, and it was excruciating watching how slowly it was put into a theatre on Broadway. But the show wasn't being changed, it was just being replicated. And that was the same when Six came in, the same when Come From Away came in. With Harmony, the process of the last 3.5 weeks has been trying to make changes, particularly to Act One, and that is torturous, to a point that you go, you can't finish a show on Broadway, that they don't get finished. So I would say the main reason to go is you can finish your show and have time to rewrite it. You can, if you do it the right model, you can have your sets, your costumes, your lighting designers, your sound design, and you just bring it in and you drop it onto a Broadway stage. That will still be expensive, but it's way cheaper than trying to do it for the first time on Broadway if it hasn't been done anywhere else.
So I've learned
Patrick,
something
do
new.
you have any thoughts on that, Patrick?
Yeah, I'd say Neil's exactly right, and it is that thing of making those. And I say this as someone who has general managed both in London and in New York. It is so painful making, like, what takes a week to do in New York, you can do in a day in London, in terms of making changes, and that's a huge element to it. Creatively, I think you get a lot more time to bake the work. And that's why, you know, you will have 10 days of previews in London, even for a new play, because you only need 10 days to make all the changes you need. Whereas on Broadway, you need 4 weeks for a revival, just because it takes that long to make the changes that you need to make.
Thank you.
But
Okay,
Marie,
I have
know
to
you have to go.
I have to
Yes.
go, but thank
Katy,
you for having
thank you,
me.
thank you so much. I'm going to ask a couple more questions after you're gone,
Okay, all right.
but I promise not to talk about you.
That's
Okay.
okay.
Maybe I
Bye-bye.
will. Well, maybe I will.
No, bye.
Thank you, Katy. So good to see you. Maureen wants to know, is there a professional association where we can find a list of producers with contact info for UK? So that's like a split question. So you're not looking for a list of producers in the UK. You're looking for some sort of magic list that has American producers that have content. Basically,
No, UK producers.
you
Look-
play producers. Well, what you need to do is do your research and see what producers that are around here who have also worked in London. I mean, off the top of my head, of course, there's no gooding, but Michael Alden, I know, has worked in London a bunch. I know a lot of producers. Cody Lassen, I think, has been involved with London productions. I think what you want to do is you want to just ask any producer that you know, have you ever produced in London, or would you like to consider the possibility? And we understand, Neil, that it's not a magic wand. It just does still sound to many of us that it would be a lot less heartache trying to develop something in London than it tends to be here in the United States.
And the other thing about London when you are looking for producers is the SOLT program over there at stage 1, and just the way that they're structured. There is many young, brilliant, creative producers that are producing and working with writers and developing shows and getting access to theaters, as opposed to New York, where if you want to be a producer, you're asked to be a co-producer largely, and you're asked to just raise your money and give it to another producer that has access to theaters and has the writer. So there is a much wider range of young producers to pick from in London who have done a lot more of what I would consider to be producing than some of the people that have won several Tony Awards in New York, who are called producers as well, but don't really do the mechanics of producing.
Yeah, basically lead producing. Basically, we don't.
And Katy's a great example of that, of someone who's done a ton of producing in small venues throughout the UK. And that's the other thing as well, not focusing just on London, because you've got producing theatres and producers throughout the UK, and again, even still, despite it, like everything else, it gets harder and harder. Edinburgh as well is another great way to get a show up and running, or you've got places in London like Soho Theatre, which for very small plays is a really great venue for new writing. And so Neil's 1,000% correct. It's very much about it's not easier, it's just different. It costs less, but it doesn't make it any less challenging.
Well, true, but the cost factor, I think, is very attractive to many of us.
I think it's the question between going, is it viable to do it in London, as opposed to, is there any viability to doing this in New York? And the answer is, it's viable but risky in London, as opposed to my position now, which is it's unviable to do this in New York at this point in time.
Okay,
I know that's negative, and I didn't want to get to that point, but that's where I am with it. And all I can do is, like, people can agree with me or disagree with me, but for my own projects and with my own money, all I can do is play by the rules in New York or not, and I choose not anymore. So,
where are you right now, by the way, Neil?
I'm in New York.
Yeah. So we're gonna have brunch tomorrow?
Well, it won't be tomorrow, but after Thanksgiving, sure.
Okay. Okay. So again, I'm going to ask everybody. I just discovered something new about Zoom. This is a new thing. When you put up your virtual hand raise, you also come on screen. So I guess I'm gonna have to live with that now. It's my concern is basically when we're out on YouTube, not having people pop up on screen as much, but it will be what it will be. So I think we've covered a lot of information. Oh, Chris, yes, Chris, what did you,
Yes.
you have your, yes.
Yeah, I didn't have it in the chat, but
I am working with a London GM who put together a budget for us. But one of the things that will kind of be next is, and I'm curious about how you view it, is that the play is a three-hander, and so we are looking for at least 2 names. And how important do you think it is for a straight play to have a name that quote unquote sells tickets in London?
This is Patrick's area for sure.
Yes. Well, it's not just about selling tickets. It's about getting the theatre in the first instance. And and so back to what I was saying earlier, from a theatre owner perspective, it's not whether or not they think your show is good enough, as it were. It's about your show versus all of the other shows that they've got producers coming to them at any one point in time. And there is a line out the door, a virtual line out the door, for every theatre owner right now for plays. So, or for theatres. So, if you're a theatre owner and someone goes, I have, a new play, but it's got this director and this star attached. Because in order to get a star, you probably need a direct. You probably need the type of director who has experience with and can handle a star. Then that is something that a theatre owner will go, yeah, I'm going to pay attention to that, in a way that if it's a new play that hasn't had a life anywhere else and therefore no track record and doesn't have a star in it, they go, it is not worth their time, because they go, I'm not sure that's going to be able to play its full run, but also it's probably not going to sell as many tickets as a play with Helen Mirren or Kristen Scott. So new play right now in the West End, starring Kristen Scott Thomas and Lily James. That basically sold out before it opened because of those 2 names. Going to the point we were making earlier about playwrights, Jez Butterworth's new play, Jez, who wrote The Ferryman, who wrote
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem.
And
he was
a couple
able to get
screenplays recently that I saw his name on.
Yeah, three billboards was his.
Yeah.
And so that, directed by Sam Mendes, those two names alone were enough to get it, and produced by Sonia Friedman and Tara Newling, who has a company with Sam. That was enough to get them a theatre, because Jez's name and Sam's name sell tickets. They've just announced their cast today, and they're lovely names who theatre goers know. Doesn't mean much to the general public, but they are named. But that is enough to get them a theatre, because people will buy tickets to that, because we know it's Jez and we know it's going to be amazing.
So I just want to thank you guys, because it's 6:50. Can you stay a little longer? Not to. I'm going to end this broadcast right now, and I'm going to get on and say some nice words to the people out there watching. But people might want to meet you afterwards in breakout rooms or something like that. Can you stay or no?
I can't, because it is almost midnight here in London.
Okay.
So
I can probably do about 10 minutes. I've got to run off to a show at 7:30, but I've got about 10 minutes.
So I want to basically thank Patrick, Gracey, Neil Gooding, and Katy Lipson for being with us today. And I want to thank everybody who comes to these meetings. We had a pretty good house today. We had about 40 people in the room. If you're out there just discovering us, and if you would like to be on our list and actually come into the room and be part of the conversation, I can make that happen. My name is Bob Ost. I'm the Executive Director of Theater Resources Unlimited, and you can email me at trunltd@aol.com. That's trunltd@aol.com, and I can invite you every week, and so you can come and be part of the room and part of the conversation. We'd love to have you be a part of us. We've been doing this since 2020, April 17, 2020, 180 consecutive weeks of doing this. And it's always been pay what you can, because we consider this, at least in part, to be a community service. originally it was really a community service. It was keeping everybody from going crazy from COVID. But you can come for nothing or you can pay something. And I'm just putting out there that it would be lovely to have people support us with donations every now and then. If you want to do that, you can just go to trudonate.com. That's true donate, trudonate.com. And you can give us a little bit of love and a little bit of encouragement to keep doing what we're doing. So again, thank you for being with us. Hope you'll join us in the weeks to come. I'm putting together my schedule for December even as we speak. Well, not even as we speak, because I'm speaking right now. But over the next couple of days, hopefully, I'm going to have some confirmations of some interesting speakers going forward. So come back, be with us, be part of the conversation, be part of the community.